So I did not introduce myself earlier, right? So for me, it's Mario, by the way. So I'm head of growth at Photon, but prior to that, I built studios for Unity, for Ubisoft, built PlayFab from zero until the acquisition to Microsoft, managed that inside of Microsoft, then started with what we have now with Photon Fusion, and obviously been in the online industry for a bit more than 20 years. But now I have two wonderful gentlemen with me now, so I give you this microphone for you. Here's another one that would be number 6. There you go. Fantastic. And we have some slides as well, so we can push it up if you guys want. There we go. It's going to start soon. We have some slides. But in the meantime, maybe I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourself, right? So let's start with Mario.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mario. I'm a game developer. I am a founder and CEO of a small studio in Canada called Artisan Studios that makes RPGs. I've been in the game industry for 20 years. I've been primarily a developer of massively multiplayer online role-playing games. So I started at Sony working on the EverQuest franchise. So I've worked on EverQuest, Star Wars Galaxies, Star Wars The Old Republic, Warhammer, pretty much most MMOs except not the big one. Not WoW. So sorry.
I'm Dariush, as everybody hopefully knows right now. I'm the CTO over at Lefty VR. Again, I mean, I explained my whole thing already, but I got my start in VR, and I've just been going ever since then in that space.
Fantastic. So the format of this panel, so first, they don't know what we're going to talk about, which is great. So everything's going to be spontaneous. So those are the best panel, in my opinion. So first, let's look at the history of multiplayer. So obviously, like, it evolved a lot in the past 20 years. There are a lot of things that changed, but it's mainly in the game design because the technology is going, like, cranking up slowly, shall I say. Obviously, for us, we're helping. So my question for you guys, so feel free one another to answer this, but when was the first time that you felt, okay, I have to start making multiplayer games because this is freaking awesome? And what was the drive behind it for you?
So I think my first experience with multiplayer games was Diablo 1. Which is one of my favorite games of all time. I knew I wanted to go into games ever since then. I actually thought I wanted to make single-player games. But when I got started, I found that while I was developing with my other developers, we preferred to compete against each other in both development and in both whatever we were working on. We couldn't do that in a single-player experience. So for me, it came from wanting to iterate quickly in a way where I wanted it to grow develop based on like what made sense. like we had a competitive multiplayer, asymmetrical multiplayer VR game, and the entire thing was just testing and being like, oh well, that sucked because that's super OP, and then changing that and going from there. So it was a lot of fun. It adds a competitive and collaborative nature, like you said, to even the development process that is difficult to get in a single player experience.
Yeah, go ahead, Mario.
Okay, sorry. I think it was when I took my first job, basically, at Sony. I remember I had a group of friends, and this is going to expose my nerdiness, sorry. So we used to play a lot of Dungeons & Dragons. So we had a group that we played with every week, and one week, everybody disappeared, and we couldn't find them for like a month or something. And then I went to their house, because they were all, it's a group of guys, like late teens, early 20s, all living together, sharing a house. And I went into the house, it was a total wreck. There was just pizza boxes and, microwave food and all this stuff everywhere. And they all had their, computers all set up, in the living room. They're all sitting there playing together. And I'm like, what the hell? What are you guys doing?
Nice party, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're like, I'm like, Marty, I'm just about to hit level 40. I'm a wizard. We're in NORAD. We're playing. It's like Dungeons and Dragons. It's EverQuest. It's a whole online world. There's millions of people. It's amazing. You have to play it. And I was like, wow. So that was my first kind of this could be kind of interesting. And then, when I met the people who developed it, And they're like, yeah, we started our little startup. We had $6 million in funding. Sony gave us a license, and yeah, we're making about $15 million a month in subscriptions. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, that's our little business. If you want, we'll give you a job answering the phones or something like that. And that was when I was like, okay, this is a crazy business. Like, I'm really interested in not just the player side, but also the business side and the social aspect of it, right?
That's right. And if you go back like 20 years ago when these games got launched, every time there was a multiplayer game, you're like, oh, it's multiplayer. Wow, this is great. And then you bring the friends and everything. And obviously doing LAN parties, and that was a big push forward, especially if you go back, even if you go to early Doom and then Age of Empires, and then you add the Rogue Spear, and then you just keep adding and adding, and then onto the MMORPG, what Jagex did, obviously, and a bunch of others. It just bring people together. But back then, if you look at it, it's not everyone who had internet, the internet connection. So it really ramped up as the broadband started to get available with higher speed and whatnot. So, but nowadays everyone can play a multiplayer game from their phone. So obviously the reach is incredible. And current state of multiplayer. That's the subject now. So if you look at multiplayer games today, and you look at the top 200 games in terms of grossing and revenue, 75% of them are multiplayer nowadays. But if you go back 5 years ago, it was just a handful of them. So in the last 5 years, it was a huge growth of multiplayer games everywhere, and there's very few single-player games that managed to go in the top 20 grossing revenue. I think the last one was Resident Evil. Right, that's the last single-player game that made it all the way up to top grossing. So it's interesting to see that. So what is your feeling regarding this huge phenomenon that multiplayer just taking over the gaming industry?
So, I think a lot of it comes from that you create content together, right? So for single-player experiences, it can only go so far. Like, you can play the game for X amount of time. I say that, but I know someone who has thousands of hours in Skyrim. But for multiplayer, you create content in the game together, right? It's an unlimited amount of potential. Every time you jump in, it's different, right? Whether it's with different people, whether you just have a different experience, right? And you chase the win, you chase the collaboration, and it allows you to, in a way where single-player games can't, again, constantly have a new, fresh, fun experience. And I think that's a big part of it. And obviously, internet's getting better, everything's getting better. The scope of these games is increasing, right? When you look at how many people can jump into a first-person Fortnite experience. Because there was a tenth of this before. On the PS3, there was a game that had 100, I think, concurrent users or something, but it wasn't quite there yet. So it's a SOCOM, okay. But now you can have these extremely fun experiences with so many more people than you could ever have before, in a way where it's not janky and it's actually fun. And I think a lot of it comes from that.
Yeah, I think for me it's I'd like to look at the multiplayer kind of game universe in waves of genres, right? So you had MMO 20 years ago, then before that it was maybe FPS with Counter-Strike and things like that. Then MOBAs, right? You have League of Legends, then Battle Royale. And I think as most of those games have gone from a PvE focus to more of a competitive PvP focus, esports have also come up along with influencers, as you were describing about creating content. I think that's why we see the convergence now of when you take Twitch, add in competitive gameplay, and then you add in the fact that esports is such a big thing, then it's almost driving developers, even from a business point of view, to focus quite heavily on competitive multiplayer games. Because if you do it right, obviously, it's like you said, it's a gold mine for developers in terms of, when we're making MMOs, the toughest thing is creating content and keeping up with player consumption. Multiplayer games, they're creating the content, as you mentioned. And second, it's following the trend of what I think younger gamers are more accustomed to. They've grown up with it, whereas when I started, show my age again, when I started playing Counter-Strike or whatever with my friends, I was already 19 or 20. It wasn't like I grew up from age 5 playing a competitive game on a phone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And if you look at the new type of games, or the games that got released in the last 6 months on the Android store and iOS, now you have match three multiplayer games, for example, which are extremely successful and they just keep growing and growing. So now we have these casual gameplays that are getting into this multiplayer world. And then if you look also at the connectivity is so much better. So, for example, if you go just 5 years ago, like in Brazil or Vietnam or Indonesia or some part of Europe where the connectivity was just extremely bad, and now it's much better. So that thank you telecom companies. Sometimes you're very expensive. You did a good job with your towers, but it brings the people together. That's really meaningful about it. And in our perspective, so as Photon. Obviously, like we're seeing the influx. So, there's Web3, everything is multiplayer, metaverse, everything is multiplayer, and then you have this whole non-gaming sector as well, which now are bringing the users together, and essentially they're taking all the learnings from the gaming industry and putting that into their business. So it's very nice to see that grow up. And so we just keep growing and growing, and we don't see any limit. Like right now, it's just skyrocketing, and so we can only see more of these multiplayer games in the future. And I think that's the next subject, actually, or not. Okay, we talk about communities. That's cool. So obviously, in PokerStars, communities must be quite a thing, because I don't know if you ever probably played poker one time in your life. You're on the table, and it often involves some beers, which definitely improve or lubricate your social skills. So by any means, it must be interesting to manage that huge community of yours.
Yeah, the community in I think any social game is like the whole thing, right? We're very, very in tune with them. Again, they're the ones playing the game, and just seeing the way we've had people. Lots of games have, but we've had people meet and get married in the game. We've had people who were, from opposite sides of the world who had never communicated, and actually, someone from Dubai who communicated with someone from Texas, and they didn't get along at first, but now they're best friends and they play poker every day. So communities grow in a way you wouldn't even expect, I think, in something like a poker where you can play across the world with anyone, right? And it is the most important thing in our products, right? Is these communities and allowing people to create and nurture these communities.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Or Canada.
Sorry. That's all right. I would say, for me, actually, I'll be contrarian then a little bit, which is, as a game developer, I try not to over-index on the communities, because the communities tend to be quite core in the games I work on. They represent usually less than 5% of the playing population. They have quite a strong influence on the development team for feature development and stuff, in terms of people go, oh, the community has asked them for this, so we got to change it. So oftentimes mistakes can be made where you make changes to a game based on what 5% of the most vocal people are asking for, and then 90% are pissed off, right? So I think what I've learned a bit about communities is we do want to nurture them, we want them to grow. I think moderating them and managing them properly is something that more players demand, and I think it's a job for developers now to make that number from 5% grow, meaning it's our responsibility now to make sure those communities are safe, they're welcoming to everybody, because they're not often, right? Let's be honest, there's a lot of, sexism and, misogyny and different things that happen in online communities that the previous, I would say, when we first started in development, they were like, oh, let everybody kind of moderate themselves and do whatever they want. But I think if we're going to really grow online games, that's actually a big area of focus for our company. What we think about is how to create games that are low friction. So meaning if people don't want to compete or if they just want to, hang out with their friends, they feel welcome and safe. And same thing with the online communities where they want to interact with the game outside of playing in the core game. They want to sell items or, talk to their friends, this kind of thing. So I think that's actually a really big focus for us.
And Mario and I worked together in the Ubisoft days, and there was times where the servers are down, and usually what happens with the community is that they come with, flame torches and pitchfork, and they're like, yeah, I want to play my game. And so then that's when communication starts. So you should not let your community go in flame, otherwise it's just going to grow and they're going to grow. So you as a community manager or someone that is handle the community, you have to talk with them and say, hey, sorry, there was an issue in the database somewhere, or there's a data center that doesn't work, XYZ, and then you have to talk with them, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, that's cool. Thank you for letting me know. I'm going to come back in an hour or something like that. So definitely you have to communicate as much as possible, and that way you're going to have happy people, good vibes only. Next subject. So now we talk about the Web3 games and metaverse. Okay, that's cool. So I'm going to start on that. So definitely, those are phases in the game industry where people talk a lot about that, and there is a lot of conversation. We can go on with this subject if we want to or not, but I wanted to still put it on the slide simply because, to me, the web per se, like a web page, it used to be a place. If you go back in the Flash days, where you had these huge communities. Anyone know Club Penguin, for example? Okay, right. It doesn't exist anymore, right? So, and the entry point and the friction is like nothing, right? So if you just type the website, you go in, you start. So, do you see this coming back? Where it's not an app, it's not something, but it's actually WebGL, and you just dive in the website and you're part of a world right away without installing anything. Is it something that you've thought about, or it's too risky? I don't know.
I do think there's gonna be a massive. I think that the tech wasn't there for high fidelity games to exist in these spaces before, but it's massively improved. Right? You have stuff like, even looking at just streaming services like xCloud, et cetera, right? You have the ability to, WebGL potentially, but maybe not, right? Maybe it's just a full streaming service that's used, again, play in a web page, right? But it's being rendered, it's being powered somewhere else on a server farm, right? So I think Web3 is a very real, very important thing in the next decade or so. I know it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people, but I think it goes hand in hand with the metaverse, and I think you'll see a lot of experiences popping up with stuff like that, where barrier to entry is non-existent. It's very important for that to be the case, right? It's very important to have, if you want millions of people doing something, you got to make it easy for them, right? You can't add friction. So I think it is going to go down that route.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I would say, Microsoft's releasing a TV with Samsung.
Yeah, it is partnership with Samsung. That's correct.
Basically, there is no Xbox required. You have the TV. Basically, you have a Series X, right? It's directly streamed, and the TV is being built custom for their streaming tech. So I think I agree. It's just a matter of time. When it comes to Web3 and Metaverse and these kind of things, I try to look at it from the player perspective of what is it that the players want, as opposed to how people are raising money and NFTs and this kind of stuff. And I think from a player perspective, the two things we see, particularly in online games, are players want instant access to virtual worlds. So they want a seamless, quick connection. And although this is kind of, let's say, the more controversial part, a lot of players, not all of them, want to be able to own, buy, sell, and trade virtual goods. Not saying they need to do it necessarily with NFTs or whatnot, but even World of Warcraft right now, it's about $1 billion market of gray items, and people go to third-party websites, they exchange accounts, so this already happens. It's not something new. When I was working on RuneScape, when the Venezuelan economy tanked, it was all being supported by RuneScape Gold. There was people were switching to farming RuneScape Gold to pay people in Venezuela. So I really honestly think this is consumer demand. It's not us as developers wanting to push this stuff on people, and I think we have to find the right solutions to meet that demand if we want them to realize those markets in a safe way, right? Where they're not being scammed.
There's something to remember is the Diablo auction house.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I think with Blizzard, they were selling dropped items, right? That's where I thought they made a mistake, meaning you're circumventing the game loop. In MMOs, what people sell and trade are usually crafting items or items you use to develop further into the game. So for me, the lesson of Diablo is don't sell what you're getting people to go through the time content treadmill to reach, because then you're just giving it away for money. But just like with mobile free-to-play games, what you're selling is time, right? If you don't want to grind, if you want to shortcut, then people buy the items directly from other players. That would be another thing is Blizzard or whomever, I wouldn't, as a publisher, ever sell things directly to players. I would let them set the market, let them sell to each other, and then you just facilitate it in a safe environment. But we'll see. You're right. It could all be crazy.
I think that the tech is early, right? I think that's what's important, and a lot of people don't look at is that it's like looking at the internet 20 years ago, right? I think we got to look at how the improvements go, because there's a lot of problems with a lot of stuff with NFTs, with how much energy they take, et cetera, et cetera. But these are problems they're working on, right? This isn't like we're saying we're going to be using this stuff in the state that it's in right now. It's where can this go in the future? And you're right, digital ownership, and digital identities are very important. There's actually, if you look at the Steam marketplace with Counter-Strike skins, that's essentially NFTs without a blockchain, right? And it's massively successful. People trade skins, people sell skins, people own skins. It's something that's already there, but with a new technology that needs to mature and needs to grow first before it gets there. But it's also the same way with xCloud, Game Pass, right? You can go back a decade and look at when essentially for the Xbox One they tried to, when it announced it, there was massive backlash because essentially they were trying to create Game Pass. Everyone was like, no. But now Game Pass is incredible. It's one of the best value you can get as a player, right? To spend $10 a month and get access to an incredible library of games. So I think it's a question of right time. It's just right time. The tech needs to evolve and it needs to get to a point where all these things make sense. But I think it's only a matter of time until all these things kind of come together.
Yeah, I'm still looking forward for the game that you use a deep link, which is like a URL to go where you want in the game. That's going to be super cool. It's coming, If I think about it, someone is making it. Cool. So, okay, next subject. So, exclusive tech findings. Oh my God. So that's pretty cool. So that's a Pandora box because there's a lot of tech happening everywhere. We talk about xCloud. xCloud is on the TV now, so it means the only device that you need. Well, you need the TV, of course, but you need a Bluetooth remote, and that's it. And then you can play, AAA, HDR, 4K game on your screen. But then there's so from my perspective, I saw so many tech in the past 5 years are incredible. Some of them is to do physics-wise. Some is more about putting the players together, the stuff that we're building, which I can talk about obviously. But for you guys, have you seen something that you think that will change the way multiplayer is built, played, and obviously sell, right?
I do think something like xCloud is something that's going to push that. Something like, the Stadia API, rest in peace Stadia, for 1 year, whatever, however long it lasted. But that technology is almost there, I think being able to essentially include people with having just a TV, right? And have access to something absolutely incredible in a way that's seamless. I think that tech is going to push incredible experiences that you would never otherwise be able to have by just building your own computer. I think it's a little bit in the future still, but I think you're going to see it really coming on its own in the next few years.
And obviously, there's the collaboration tools as well that sprout in the last 3 years, and COVID helped with that because everyone had to work remotely. But then when you have to make a build, and you're 300 people working on the project, it can get cumbersome. So it's better to have your computer in the cloud and do everything remotely in the one giant computer, let's say. So there's tons of techniques that sprout. So have you seen anything on your side that was like incredible? You're like, oh my god.
For me, it's still, I know it's a bit passé, it's still the new HD pipeline for Unity is a big difference from the original UHD stuff. So thank you for that. We're using that on our games, and now that they've bought Multiplay, the server tech that they have with Unity has really been a bit more useful for how we're able to do matchmaking and stuff like what they did with Apex Legends. And of course, Unreal Engine 5, right? I think both of those engines have moved the needle so far for developers from what, like I can tell you a generation ago, as a CEO and a former game designer, I could kind of use these engines in a very rudimentary way. I wasn't like somebody who every day was putting stuff into the engine because I'm not a programmer and I wasn't a technical designer. But with the new iterations, it's quite easy for me even to go into Unity, to go into UE5, to use all the new tools, to build, scripted scenes. A lot of them use scripting languages that make it a lot easier if you're not a programmer. I think it's really democratizing game development and allows you to release games multi-platform, simultaneous. Our team does games with 30 to 50 hours of content on 5 or 6 platforms at once. We develop it with a team of less than 30 in 2 years.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
Would have been possible.
Team size can be very nimble and small. And in terms of multiplayer per se, you said multiplay and orchestration of servers, which is to spawn servers around the world, making them go up, making them go down. You needed a DevOps team of at least 4 or 5 people to manage that. And now you have like services that do that for you, like Multiplay, GameEye, and a bunch of others. And definitely, like you will, it ease the process of creation. In terms of hosting, we used to say all the time, oh, okay, what's your server? But now, like, the server can also be on the device, obviously. It can be in the cloud. It can be co-rendered in multiple ways using communal infrastructure. And then on our side at Photon, we are working on an MMO service, just so people didn't know, but yeah. So soon enough, we're going to release our own MMO service, so that you can have like tens of thousands of people together, and again, making it super easy for anyone to create awesome experience. And so from my perspective, I would say again that I'm waiting for 2025. Okay, sorry, I'm waiting since a while when AR glasses are going to come, and that will change pretty much everything in terms of how you won't carry a phone anymore. You just have a little pair of glasses that a bunch of you have here. So you're already well equipped, which is great. You just need to have like the device that is coming. So that's going to be very interesting, definitely. So when you are building a multiplayer game, obviously, for many, it's like, oh my God. So where to start? It's risky. It involves money. There's not that much knowledge. There's not that much experience or people that have done it in the past. Well, okay, awesome. The panel, okay, fine.
Only old people.
but where I want to go with this is that do you see both for indies and for big studios, multiplayer as being something that that should be taken as a grain of salt, or we're past that and things move forward?
I think I think that it is risky to build a multiplayer only game as an indie studio, right? Like it's something that is very important for growth, but multiplayer only game only works if you have players, right? So that's I think the biggest risk is getting that initial group of players together and making and going through organic growth, like you're saying with Stumble Guys, like it's just organically growing, right? But you need that nest egg of really dedicated people to kind of push it forwards. And I think that's one of the big risks of making a multiplayer only game in general.
Yeah, I think it's I agree. It's the riskiest thing normally in game development because you're introducing randomization that you can't control, right? So if you make single-player games, I always say, I have friends that work in film, and they ask me all the time, it's kind of like making a movie. And I'm like, okay, imagine the movie, when the actor comes into the room, they can go wherever they want. You don't know if they're going to go left, they're going to go right, they're going to jump, and you have to plan for all of that. Now imagine there's 500 of them, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. How do you predict what people are going to do and make sure that their experience that whole time is a good one? And normally that comes through years of iteration, and you're absolutely right. The big problem with multiplayer games is if you're wrong, even 10%, the game dies, and most indies, they make one game at a time, which means the company dies. So it's a big risk if you're independent, unless, maybe you got some funding, you've got, I don't know, maybe you're being paid to take that risk, but I always advise people to start smaller single-player experiences, refine gameplay, learn about that first before going into pure multiplayer, especially if there's a persistent element, because then you have new things that you have to watch out for. Do you hold people's credit card information? Are you responsible for their personal data, financial data? All this stuff is like scary legal financial stuff that, most developers, honestly, when we start out, we're not thinking, I'm going to have to prevent hacks and, all this kind of stuff. It's security, all this. It all comes with multiplayer gaming, right?
That's right. And then when we were building PlayFab in 2014, 15, whatnot, I used to say to everyone, the moment you start making events is that you have to listen to the community and whatnot. But then obviously when you mix multiplayer with live ops, all of a sudden you're like, okay, I don't own my game anymore, right? So, it's the players themselves who's going to drive the direction of the things you need to build, and you have to be listening all the time. And obviously when it's very hard to make a one-year roadmap after the game is released. I would say it's like close to impossible, maybe like 3 months, something like that. And be very nimble, and then really consider culturalization, localization, and then obviously each community that you're going to have in those pockets and area will behave differently in the game, so then you have to implement different visual elements. But essentially regarding the risk of multiplayer, obviously use Photon, so that way you don't have to think too much about netcode because it's super hard. But I would still say, contrary to you guys, please build multiplayer games, right? So anyway, okay, cool. So the future of gaming. So we've touched a little bit about that earlier, which is more about the tech itself. From my crystal ball, I can definitely say that 85% of the very good gameplay in multiplayer in 5 years from now really doesn't exist. I still very much believe that we are at the beginning of multiplayer, simply because there was not enough research and not enough, shall I say, opening the Boy Scout Bible of games that you can do as a kid and take those 2,000 games and type of gameplay and put that online. So how big can this grow, and how far these things will be, we don't know. But definitely there's a lot of things that are possible. So if you have your own crystal ball, what do you think is going to be the next big thing in the coming years?
I think we'll see a resurgence of some games that attempted to do things, but they're a little bit too early. So I don't know if anyone played stuff like 1 vs. 100 on the Xbox a long time ago. It was like a little game show where one person faced off against all 100 other people making stuff. I think you'll see stuff like that at a massive scale, with Twitch taking off, with everything like that taking off, having like an influencer-based product like that where they can communicate and interact with their viewers in a way that's not yet done. I think that's going to be a big thing in the next little while.
There's one thing I saw was actually in Netherlands. It's called it's a TV show. It's called The Ring, and then people at home could interactively participate from their mobile phone with the game show. I think that's super original, and we should see more of that. But yeah, definitely. Sorry. And you, Mario?
I think for me, I kind of agree with what you last said. I feel like the direction of multiplayer game is going in kind of two ways that we're trying to keep an eye on. One, completely what we call developers as stewards as opposed to owners, meaning communities and fans will begin to own persistent worlds more than we do. We saw this a lot on RuneScape, for instance. We have the classic server, old school RuneScape, and because we had lost some of the trust of the community with changes we did to RuneScape, one of the things that we had to do for old school RuneScape is every time we did an update to the game, we had to present all the features to all the subscribers, and basically they got to vote yes or no. And if it wasn't 70% voting yes, we couldn't push that update to the server. It got shut down. So imagine, months of development work. So we almost had to do like a PR campaign, to convince people like, hey, we need to do these updates. And I think games are really going in that direction where developers aren't going to be the sole owners of people's data, people's work, virtual economies. And you see that a lot in games like EVE Online, and this is very clear kind of examples. The other thing I'm hoping to see for the future of multiplayer games is games that I think are more open and welcoming, that are not competitive. So I think of things more like Animal Crossing as opposed to Counter-Strike, or games where people want to, and I think you're seeing a little bit of a trend in this in MMOs where people are pitching games that have no combat, no killing. It's just about, I live in a virtual world and I cook potions, or I want to, in Star Wars Galaxies we have this a lot too, I'm a farmer, or I want to be a dancer. And I think that's part of what the drive to metaverse and this kind of shared virtual world experience is going to end up being. It's not just about me fighting in League of Legends, but it's kind of a virtual space for me to share with my friends, right?
And let's not forget that we just got out of COVID, right? So where everyone was at home, and Animal Crossing was a big, antidepressant for many, which was just a really fluffy feeling in an area where people can just go and be entertained. And that's our job, right? Is to entertain. It's not necessarily just to make like big flame wars or send SWAT team to some streamers, people, right? Come on, right? So there's a lot of exploration that needs to be done. And in terms of genre, like seriously, there's so many that have no multiplayer game, like at all. So, especially on mobile, there are live ops where you have friends, it's turn-based, but it's not like real-time presence. And, let's not forget, when we talk about multiplayer, it's really real-time presence. It's not like he sent me a pie, and I received my notification, I'm going to accept the pie, right? It's different. So anyway, let's move on forward, and advice for game devs. So definitely, so we've gone through a lot of success. What would be your advice for game devs that are either starting or have been iterating in games, and what would be the path of success that you believe that they should follow to be successful in multiplayer development?
I think the big thing is don't be disheartened by failure. I think you have to fail to succeed. I think you're going to fail before you succeed. That's just the reality of life. And you can get very lucky and not have that, but it's just don't let you create a multiplayer game that doesn't have any players, whatever. It's still a building experience. You've grown your skills. You are better at it. You have a better understanding of what players might want for your next one, and you can use that experience to build something better each time. So don't be disheartened, because it's hard not to be if something fails, but pick yourself back up, keep going.
Great. I think the best advice I got when I first started working on online games and stuff was to, when we were coming up with a core concept, to just erase everything from my mind backwards, from story, extra mechanics, persistence, and focus on the first core 5 minutes of the interaction loop, which is just when multiplayer begins, essentially. So like if you're in an MMO, it would be, I guess, a raid or a dungeon or something like this. To create that in Greybox, do it with a team of less than 5 or 10 people. Don't be afraid, as you said, to fail and to throw it away and to try it over and over and over and over again until you've reached something that you feel like, okay, this small slice of experience is exactly what we want to do. And then I turn that into a factory and you replicate, basically. And that is, even if you remember when World of Warcraft went into alpha, what they did was they built one zone, one dungeon. In the closed alpha, everybody played it, right? Everybody played this one zone. They had it was Alan Atkin, who was a chief creative then, who was like, okay, so they would change the UI, they added the question marks for quests, all these little touches, and then finally, after a year, they said, okay, that's it. Now, replicate that. That's our multiplayer experience. So that's always been the advice that I found most useful for me.
And I can only double on that one. So, for example, for Stumble Guys, as I was saying earlier, we have 22 million daily active users, but it started at 0, right? Like any game. And but before it was released in the store, what we did is create the sample, and the sample is literally box and little pills moving around, and like we're like, wow, our little sample is quite fun when we are together, and then we found a team in Finland called Co-operative Games, and they took 6 weeks to take that sample, which was very well networked, obviously, because we built it ourselves, and they made it pretty, right? And then launch it in the store, and voila. So in the end, Stumble Guys took 3 months total from our sample, starting from the sample and building it to make it look pretty, but it's still a 2-step process, like you just said, which is you have your MVP, most valuable product, and you make sure that it works, and then you're like, okay, yes, it's networked, it's working well. Then after that, you start making it look pretty. So that would be my biggest advice for all of you. And my second advice is don't be afraid. Right? Be unique and be genuine. And that way you're going to be able to it's risk to be unique, right? But then you would be a lighthouse if you make something that is fantastic. Cool. So, okay, we're out of time, but we might have still time for one question or two. Anyone have questions? You have a question there? Okay, I'm going to do the mic guy as well, so that's great. So, all right, there you go.
One thing I've always thought about multiplayer games, and video game preservation might not be something that everyone thinks about, and it might not be the most important thing, but I've always found, multiplayer games, I have a lot of fond memories with some. I know a lot of people do, and it becomes really hard to preserve those games, and I feel like there's 3 layers to it. There's the shooter games that if they have LAN, when the server shut down, you can keep them going, but some don't, and they kind of become just unplayable discs sitting in your house. And then the MMOs, like when they shut down, I know fans sometimes bring them back, but I feel like even with MMOs, they're so long-lasting that, and Mario might be able to better, have insight on this, but like even when you create an expansion and the game lasts 15 years, a lot of the time the game that people are most fond of are the ones like from 10 years ago, and it's a completely different game now with all the expanders layered on, and then the preservation of this game becomes really difficult to tie down because they're preserving eras of it, and then the game alone is so massive. When it goes offline, it might just be gone completely. And like Club Penguin, the web browsers, I know there isn't Club Penguin rewritten, but those web browser games, since they were never downloaded onto people's hard drives, when they go down, they're usually completely gone. So I don't know, do you guys ever think about video game preservation? Do you have advice to maybe help it? Because I know like adding LAN to a game makes it.
Well, I have 2 points there, and then I'm going to let Mario, because I'm sure he has answer to that. But there's a strategy which you can have multiple world, right? So for example, I was talking about Art of Conquest earlier in my presentation. So you have 350 something servers, and each of the servers have different calibration, right? But then those servers, after that, you can vote to make them merge with others or not, and decide what would be the parameters that are kept. So in the end, like you're literally giving the players the chance to decide where things are going. And I think that's what democracy is in all of that. And then, how about you, Mario?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would say in the MMO space, we have thought about this a lot because the expense to operate and manage those games when they fall below a certain population level is significant. It's not cheap for us to maintain those servers. So what I think is there are two things that have to happen. One, kind of my hopeful prediction that games become more community owned. The idea that I, as the developer of EverQuest, don't own EverQuest. You do. The community owns it. So you own. I see a future where you control the servers. Maybe we remote in to do updates or things like that, but the servers are not housed necessarily in the development studio or whatnot. The backups and the archives are more open source. People are able to create their own experiences with the code. I think that, to me, is how we'll be able, with persistent games, at least like MMOs, to preserve them in the future. And that's why we're seeing trends where people are trying to do that with emulated servers, with old code. And I think it's going to be our job as developers to help, and to actively help. But to do that, you need independent companies. It's really hard. Public companies that own IP and things like this are never, EA is never going to surrender control of the servers to the community. So I think there'll be a new generation of game developers that will have to view this as more like, I'm, creating this playground, but it's your playground, it's not mine. If that makes sense.
And there's a company called Games that is now part of the Embracer Group, and what they do is they buy old games that have a community and they revive it. Yeah, and they're making a huge business out of that, because if there's a community that stays for 3 years without any update, it's like, okay, there's something there. So then they take these games, add live ops to it, and then put more content. So that's something to think about. So thank you so much, guys. That was great. So that was the multiplayer track.